explored to a certain extent, because as you can see that most of the environmental movements and issues related to the environment are most of the times they are discussed in relation to the rural. But it's very surprising to see that despite the growing challenges of urbanization and the population sprawl, this very, very magnanimous population sprawl in most of the cities that we can see in India right now, we barely we talk about environmental issues, contextualizing them in the cities. Excuse me. Excuse me. So that is where the need arises to talk more about cities, because we know that a time will come when the population of most of these cities would be outgrowing the carrying capacities, and considering the fact that we are now grappling with several very, very magnanimous, like Gunjan was telling about the pollution issues in Delhi in yesterday's class. And as we can see that in most of these cities, the challenges would be, the environmental challenges would be escalating, and at the same time, the population would also be increasing. So we can very clearly see that there would be very, very dramatic and drastic changes that are predicted to take place in most of, in not only India, so to say, but also in several other developing countries that we can see, mostly in Africa and Asia. So we are, on the one hand, we can see that we are witnessing a very, very large scale, pronounced process of urbanization, because now if we take the statistic, we would be able to say that at least, like I would say, more than half of the world's population now live in cities, and all the human settlements, they are now expanding. They're largely expanding, they're very rapidly expanding in these areas, in the urban areas. And there is a very, very prolific increase in population density, as we can see across all the continents. This is something that United Nations had also come up with its in its one of its reports in 2011, about these dramatic changes in urbanization and how they would be manifesting on the human community. And in most of these cases in India, if we see, for instance, that we can see that the rural to urban migration has also increased to a large extent, primarily right now, apart from the job challenges in the post-COVID period because of the loss of jobs and livelihoods, because we would also be seeing a large scale a large number of people who would be migrating to the cities, because there is a very high level of pressure on the ecosystem services, and which would not be able to provision a lot of people, a lot of communities in the coming days. And this would definitely have very, very dire and troubling social consequences. And while we can definitely we can talk about the city and the manifold environmental challenges that are present in the cities, on the one hand, if we see the challenges, on the other hand, we also, as environmental experts, we also need to understand the fact that urban areas, in their original form, they had a very they used to have a very, very dynamic natural ecosystem, and there were multiple ecosystem services. If you see, for instance, in many of the cities in South India, for instance, and I would be talking about Bangalore, but in several other cities like Chennai, for instance, if you see that Chennai had been, historically, Chennai was a city which had so much of grasslands and city forests and water bodies, lakes in the city. And there had also been numerous, I think, studies on the urban commons, reflecting on the water bodies in many of these cities, and several others as well, several other smaller cities as well. So, for instance, there had been multiple studies on Dehradun, for instance, the extent to which Dehradun's greenery have exponentially decreased in the last decades. But Dehradun had been such a naturally rich and vibrant, it had such a vibrant ecosystem. at one point of time. And of all the ecosystem services, first of all, we need to understand that historically all these cities had a very dynamic and quite a bit of area occupied by these many of these natural many of these natural areas existed in the cities historically. But something that had been very important, and it still continues to be so, is water. And fresh water, as we all know, it is essential for human survival across the globe. We cannot we cannot talk specifically about any city, but I think that the need of water is something that is universal. And as we can see that many of these cities like Bombay and Bangalore, they had an extensive network of water bodies which right now had been um, impaired because of the effects of urbanization. But if we are also talking about environmental challenges on the one hand, we have to also parallelly think about ways in which we should at least try making some efforts in restoring these impaired water systems, these impaired water bodies in the cities. And we can see that of all the resources that have been affected in the cities, because as a result of urbanization, like most of the city forests have been cut, major urban common areas, they have been diverted for different other kinds of land use purpose. But water as a resource have been specifically affected by the process of urbanization. And by 2050, you would be very surprised, and I think you would be very worried to know about this, that there has been a projection that by 2050, city-based water shortages are predicted for as many as 3 billion urban dwellers across the globe. So, what role do we have here? That is one question I think which is very important, because we are now talking about all these challenges, and very clearly it cannot uh, go like this for a very long period of time, because it goes like this: if this kind of water shortage continues, then we as a humanity, we are doomed. So, one thing that we have to think about is that what role we have to play over here. And having said that, after a very long period of research, environmental social scientists as well as environmental naturalists had formed a kind of a framework that you can see here, something that is known as the socio-ecological systems. This is a framework which takes into consideration multiple political and economic conditions as integral within the functioning of the ecological processes, as integral within the ecological components. And thus, it has been said time and again that while we need to conserve the environment, and considering the fact that there is right now a large scale population sprawl, we will not be able to extricate environment from the society. And a focus on socio-ecological system thus means that multiple social institutions like governance, like community-based bodies, would play an integral role in ensuring better adaptation to these environmental challenges. But unfortunately, if we see the recent IPBS reports as well, they would be stressing on the fact that there is very little exploration of the role of institutions, social institutions, political processes, governance, democracy, on the kinds of solutions that we are thinking about environmental challenges. So for instance, if you take the surface water bodies that we are talking about, for instance, the freshwater lakes, which have historically existed in multiple cities in India. If you see in the north, for instance, Udaipur, cities like Udaipur, then I was talking about Dehradun as well. Then again, if you see these Bangalore cities like Bangalore and Chennai, you would see that these freshwater lakes had been extremely critical historically to support human civilization, and they provided so many provisioning services, regulating services, ecosystem services for the communities. But something that has been time and again ignored is the fact that many of these freshwater ecosystems, so if you take city rivers, if you take city wetlands, if you take all these lakes, they have been historically managed by rural communities as common resources, as common pool resources, a term that Elinor Ostrom, who is a Nobel Prize winner in economics, who has done phenomenal work on commons, she uses time and again this term common pool resources, which are jointly used by the communities, utilized as well as managed by the communities. But right now, what we see is that these commons or these water bodies, which had been critically managed as common pool resources by the rural communities, have been largely co-opted by the state authorities. In most of the cases, so for instance, if you remember, we were talking about joint forest management in one of the classes. So this joint forest management is nothing new, but it is actually a form of community-based natural resource management, which has been co-opted by most of the state departments right now. But still, we can see that many of these urban commons, the lakes, the forests, the wetlands, they continue to be accessed. So although the rights have now, right now, there have been major curtailment of community rights, because most of these communities are no longer, they are permitted to use many of these resources, but they continue to be accessed by these communities for different kinds of uses. Apart from livelihood uses, there are also cultural uses, for aesthetic purposes, for recreational purposes. But in most cases, what we can see, and again, this is something that is troubling, is the fact that the users of these urban commons, they lack formal ownership over the lands that they used to access historically. Now, we have to understand that if this social ecological system is a framework that natural scientists, environmental, social scientists, they are coming up with, and they are trying to say that these socio-ecological systems would play an extremely important role in governing the natural resources, in restoring the natural resources which have been damaged, which have been impaired, which are lost, then we need to acknowledge the fact that the social has a very important role to play in controlling the natural resources. The city municipalities, the government agencies, the local ecosystem governance. Now, there can be different kinds of challenges. So in most of the cases, we see that people who are, so for instance, the forest department would be telling you that doing something like this would largely also require the help of the local communities. But since there is a large scale hostility, people do not want to come and work together because of the social heterogeneity. It is leading to a large scale fragmentation of many of these natural in the restoration of many of these natural ecosystems. But despite many of such regulatory slippages that are being talked about by the city governments, by the municipalities, who are right now trying to deal with a lot of these challenges of reduced capacity to control many of these commons, we have to more strongly come up with solutions which are practical. And this is something which I personally have felt right now, working on urban environmental issues for quite some time, that we have to come up with um, certain methods which are practical, and at the same time uh, we have to devise some ways in which the connect between the people and the nature can be strengthened. Because remember something, if there is no personal connect between communities and nature, think about most of the cities right now. I would urge you to think about most of the overpopulated cities right now. Do people have time to think about nature, considering their busy lives, considering the kinds of work demands, considering the kinds of formal commitments that they have in their individual workplaces? Do you think that people would be having uh, time, or people would be finding necessary, because of the pressures of work, would people be always willingly find it necessary to come voluntarily and do something that can be useful in the long run? Number one, they do not have time. And number two, in most of these cities, people are isolated. People they do not feel any kind of connect to the place that they are living. So why would they all of a sudden think about conserving nature? So while we are talking about the socio-ecological system, this is something that I have personally felt for quite some time now, that we have to come up with certain processes that can actually establish this connect between communities and the nature in the city. And we have been for quite some time, the topic that I would like to discuss today, that is environmental placemaking. This is fortunately, we had been fortunate enough to come up with this term in many of our studies that we have been doing right now and also in the past. And I would be drawing on my own field experiences on how placemaking can be established very effectively, and also how it can be very effectively used in nature conservation, considering the kinds of changes that we see right now in the cities, and considering the fact that right now there are a lot of migrant population in the cities. So how do we foster community engagement? How do we foster stewardship in cities which are largely multicultural, which are right now which are populated mostly with migrants? So how do we do that? So as I was telling you, that we will have to come up, if as you can see this very integration in the right hand side of this figure, which is talking about adaptation, resource use, and management practices. So, how can we come up with something, some tangible method in which this integration can be forged between the social and the ecological processes? This is something that has been of concern for quite some time, and that is why we came up with this term environmental placemaking in a little different way, because um, place is something that we have been studying about in sociology for several years. And we had always learned about the fact that place is something which is not only a physical unit. Place is not something where we stay, or some particular building or some particular physical arrangement. Place is not like that. But place is an entity with which we make some kind of social connect. So, for instance, we call a particular apartment our house, not only because of the fact that it is a physical structure and it has provided us with shelter, But we also call it a house because we have certain emotive attachments. We have certain kinds of material attachments to that particular place. We might be having a particular neighborhood with which we are familiar. We might be having certain culture. We have might be having certain kinds of social organization of which we are a part of that has made us much more comfortable. So in a sense, we have developed a kind of attachment, a personal sense of place with this dwelling, with the house. So we have always learned, when we were doing sociology, we had always learned that there is a particular process which is known as place making. So place becomes our own when we start to connecting to it. When we start connecting to it emotionally, and when we start making a sense of place. And then, as we have been, as students of sociology, as we have been talking about placemaking, when I was a researcher, I used to think that this is a concept that can be so meaningfully used in the context of environment, in the context of environmental conservation, in the context of contemporary environmentalism. So if it can be true in the case of our own house, in the case of the physical structures that we visit, or wherever we go, why cannot it be true in the case of environmental conservation? Because if nature conservation is a necessity in today's globalized worlds, we have to ensure that people make a bit of connect to nature. And how can this connect be established? This is something that actually had fascinated us, because it is we already know that it is very important to understand environmental consciousness, and something that we have discussed earlier as well. We refer to this as environmentalism. But considering the global environmental change and the challenges, we cannot afford to focus on any typical prototype of environmentalism, like we have earlier done environmentalism of the North, environmentalism of the South. But in an increasingly globalized world, which is characterized by so many things like migration, teleconnections, changing ecologies, we have to think a bit more dynamically. And in this kind of a globalized world, which is sort of providing us with so much of technological advances, so much of elements of consumption, so much of entertainment, can we really inspire people? Can we sort of uh, push them to move beyond these elements of the globalized world and think about nature? And this is where we tried to come up with this concept to move beyond all these kinds of dichotomies, to identify environmental placemaking as a process where we can forge sense of place from all kinds of communities, be it a migrant community, be it a rural community in the city, be it a slum dweller, be it children, be it the neighborhood people. So we wanted to pool in collective capacities from all kinds of people who are residing in the cities right now, and see how these collective capacities can be utilized effectively towards addressing many of these growing environmental challenges in the city. So we had to do field work very extensively for getting a sense of this process of environmental placemaking. We had to talk to numerous people, we had to do multiple surveys, door-to-door surveys. We had to talk to different kinds of actors, the government bodies, the NGOs, the visitors who are every day coming to these lakes, the apartment people, the neighborhood apartments, the children. So multiple people we had to talk to in order to do this particular work, in order to get a sense from each one of them that what do nature mean for them. If nature is essential for them, and if it is essential, then to what extent it is essential for them. And the most important question, how much would they be willing to socially invest? I'm not talking about monetary investment. I'm talking about personal investment, investment of one's time, one's commitment, how much they would be willing to invest in the process of nature restoration. In the neighborhood areas. So for instance, if there is a lake, we targeted the neighborhood communities. We targeted the visitors. We targeted the particular NGOs who are looking after that lake. We targeted the state bodies. And we wanted to talk to the people. And in most of the cases, when we were talking to these people, the kinds of responses, I would be sharing the field work, which is very, very interesting. I would be sharing that with you. But the kinds of responses that we were getting were very different, and they were very distinct from each other, because as you can understand that the urban would not be comprised of a homogeneous community. People are largely heterogeneous. So something that a particular apartment dweller would be telling me about restoration of nature, about their own connect with the nature, would be very different from what a neighborhood slum community would be telling me about. Their needs, their dependence, their vision, everything is very different. Their experiences of nature, everything is very different. But then we made it a point to not leave anyone out of this process, because we realized that every opinion and every practice is important. We realized that every intervention is important. Considering the fact that cities are busy, people do not get time, people are overcommitted in their own work, they are overstressed. Each and in such a context, each and every ideology, each and every piece of participation, each and every idea is welcome. And we cannot really afford to make any kind of choice, but to utilize this collective, this shared ideology towards a much stronger commitment for nature conservation. So that is why we came up with this term environmental placemaking, where we try to refer to distinctive practices, disparate practices, meanings and ideologies, try to make a note of all these terms. These practices might be distinct, they might be disparate, meanings might be different, but they have all been utilized towards forging a collective identity for a place of nature. So we tried to trace the very, very different reasons from these people as to why nature is important for them. So for a mother, I'm just giving you an example, try to look into the differences. For a mother, a lake might be important because that is the only place where she can bring her children. Apart from playing video games and different kinds of indoor games, being confined in the homes, she wants some natural exposure for her children. So that might be a reason for her to contribute to any kind of effort towards utilizing, towards the conservation of the lake. But the same reason for the conservation of a lake might be very different from for any other visitor. So maybe the reason that a mother is citing might be very different from what a visitor told us. That they might be coming here for meditation. That is why they want to restore. That is why they want a restored version of this lake. They might be coming here for doing any kind of exercise. They might be coming here for a walk. So by doing this, or by particularly focusing on this idea of environmental placemaking, we wanted to extend the vision of nature beyond its physical and geographical setting. By looking into translocal linkages, by looking into different hybrid cultural processes, and in doing this work, when we sort of wanted to publish this work in journals, we also sort of we wanted to provide a kind of critique to the very long standing ideas, like you have done earlier, the work of Ramchandra Guha and Martinez Alier, who talks about southern environmentalism and northern environmentalism. So for instance, if you remember that they have been talking about the fact that in northern environmentalism, nature has to be kept pristine, so no kind of community influence is ideal for nature according to them. And then on the other hand, southern environmentalism is trying to say that it is only nativized or rooted practices which are essential for nature conservation. But then we realized that we can no longer, considering the fact that many of our cities right now, they have become very dynamic, they have been hubs of migrant population, we realized that we can no longer pigeonhole our thoughts, or we can no longer confine ourselves within these dichotomies of the north and the south, but we have to devise some newer ways. We have to come up with new research on how we can actually go a bit deeper and sort of solve the problems which are contemporary, which are new, but at the same time which are very severe. And for solving these kinds of problems, we would be needing a process which is participatory, which is collective. And according to us, placemaking as a process, there can be nothing better than placemaking as a process which is so dynamic, which is so hybrid, which takes into consideration multi-actor, multiple communities, and which sort of doesn't leave anyone behind because a person is migrant, because a person is not native. Because we cannot really afford to do that. We require personal investments from all kinds of communities. And this is where we realized that placemaking would require a much deeper integration within the scholarship on environmentalism, rather than only talking about the north or only talking about the southern kinds of environmentalism. We have to widen our horizons. There is no other way out. So we also tried to make an effort to sort of come up with land change and place-based research. We tried to look into processes such as deforestation, agricultural expansion, and how urbanization unfold over different kinds of scales, spatial and temporal scales. And also, not only collaborations, but in several cases, there can also be contestations that can evolve as a result of social negotiations within the actors. Because most of these actors, as we are taking into consideration a large pool of people or communities, so these are not passive people. These are, everyone is, it is not a homogeneous community, it is not a static body of respondents, but it is largely heterogeneous. So there are chances that there can be conflicts, there can be contestations within all these respondents as drivers of the process of change. And in most of the cases, we found that the existing research on urban environmental issue looks into polarizations rather than coming up with an integrated approach. They sort of look into polarizations between the urban environmentalists and the communities, and they try to think about the fact that sort of communities are always, maybe the marginal communities in the cities are always disadvantaged, which is a fact. I would not deny that. But then it is actually, we cannot just stop saying that communities are disadvantaged, but we have to come up with some strategy or some plan to capacitate them in a way so that they can participate much more effectively in these restoration plans, in these restoration processes. And most of these studies, we found that they do not actually engage with several instances where collective efforts exist. Like I would be talking about the city of Bangalore, where collective efforts actually exist in restoring many of these urban natural spaces. And this is essential for everyone. So irrespective of whether the community is marginal or whether the community, whether a particular individual is staying in an apartment, it is essential because the green spaces, if you see in the city neighborhoods, the green spaces perform a large range of social ecological functions. They impact our well-being, they impact physical as well as mental well-being of a very, very essentially diverse collective of communities. So one and all would be having some reason to contribute to the process of ecological restoration, because holistically these range of ecological functions impact the well-being of the communities. And placemaking as a process helped us to trace as well as inculcate behaviors which can be labeled as environmentally responsible. So let's take some examples of how we actually, so as I'm discussing this particular work with you, I'm very excited because we have sort of single-handedly, we have talked to so many people over such a long period of time, and it was not very easy to start off with. There had been major challenges, there had been constraints, there had been several problems identifying the respondents, there had been rejections, there had been refusals from people to talk about. But then all the effort that had been put into this while doing this research in Bangalore, right now it's very fascinating to share the insights with all of you, because the kinds of observations or the kinds of data that we very fortunately we were able to get out of this research had it has not only led to a lot of ecological awareness within these communities with whom we talked, but it has also inspired a very vibrant body of research in the aftermath. When we came up with the studies in the form of publications, in the form of talks, people started to realize the value of using environmental placemaking as an idea very effectively towards environmental conservation. And as you can see this picture, this is actually a lake. This is a restored lake, and this has been, and not one state, there had been no formal agencies. There was not one state or municipal body that had been involved in the process of restoring this entire lake. So it's entirely the effort of the communities, the neighborhood communities, who came forward and who ensured that the lake has to be restored, because there are multiple needs that are associated to the restoration of this particular lake, because the community felt a strong impetus about the fact that a restored lake can serve so many functions apart from ecological functions. They can perform social functions. They can be integral for multiple cultural services, and that is why we tried to trace a route to look into the lakes as social ecological places. So instead of always talking about our houses or maybe our homes as particular examples of places, here we tried to look into the lakes as places in themselves. And we tried to come up with different instances of placemaking. Two particular instances were there: the social and ecological, the role of placemaking in shaping stewardship patterns, how placemaking can foster ecological awareness across the communities, and how subjective place-based attachments can be used towards the conservation of urban lake commons. Now, very interestingly, we divided this idea of placemaking into social and ecological. So there were some causes, there were some responses when we were talking about people, when we asked them questions about uh, their personal, what they feel about the fact that the lakes have to be restored. There had been multiple people, like the senior citizens, for instance. I'm just coming to that, but there had been several people who talked about their own personal lives, people who talked about their own personal reasons, people who talked about a very strong social connect with the lakes as a place. So, for instance, I remember we had actually spent quite some time talking to a group of elderly community who comes to this lake very frequently, almost every day. So when we used to go for field work, we used to see this group of people who were mostly aged, these group of people, and they had a particular place beneath a tree, a large banyan tree, which they had sort of occupied, and that is a place where they used to meet, they used to chat, they used to talk to their friends. So basically that had been a social space for them. So several elderly people at a particular lake that is known as the Kasavanahalli Lake, they have actually labeled it as the senior citizens corner, because this is the only place in the city that they find safe. Otherwise, outside it's all full with traffic and there are always cars and vehicles, so they cannot move properly, and then their family does not allow them to venture onto the streets because it's unsafe. There can be chances of accidents because it's very very congested and crowded. So this is the only place that they talked about, that this is a place where they find a kind of solace. They find a place for themselves. And that is why they strongly feel that there has to be some effort that needs to be invested towards more restoration, more and more of restoration efforts like this. So try to see that these are all social reasons. So, for instance, a group of elders, this is just an excerpt from an interview. So they told us that we feel lonely, and that is why this lake is a very good social space for us. In old age, it's not easy to do many things. So here we find people of our age, we find companionship. We are all from different states and places, but we are all still friends. It's a great feeling. So this particular excerpt from the interview, it speaks about several things. It would not be right to say that it is only talking about the fact that they desperately need this place, they desperately need to come here because otherwise they are very lonely. Their children might be busy with their own work. But apart from that, also try to see that how this particular lake, this particular restored lake, also acts as a point of cultural amalgamation, where people who otherwise have very distinct and different natives, people from multiple states and multiple places, with a very, very different sense of belongingness, very, very different sense of culture, they have all become friends. So, apart from providing a social space for a community, listen to this very carefully, apart from providing a social space to this group of elderly community who otherwise feel lonely, who otherwise suffer from depression, who otherwise have no friends, this particular lake also serves the purpose of bringing together people from multiple cultural points, from multiple places, from multiple with very very different sets of ideologies, and that's a great feeling. That's a very nice feeling. Another, as you can see, all these pictures have been taken by me. This is another picture. As you can see, that this is a walking trail where right now people, you can see this elderly person, he's taking a walk. And this had not been there before. This particular trail that you can see right now, This had been a sort of made clear by the community itself, because earlier it was all forest and it was an extremely dirty, sewage filled area. And you cannot just, looking at this picture right now, you cannot just imagine what it was before. It was extremely polluted and a very, very bad sight. So from there, the community had been successful in making it such a green and such a vibrant space which can be utilized by so many people. So this is right now a walking trail where people come and they these communities, they do different kinds of things. They might come with their friends, they might come to chat with each other. Mothers bring their children in order to show them the trees, in order to familiarize their children with different plants. Multiple uses can be traced right now. Another elderly citizen, this is again another very interesting example I remember, and that is why I actually included it here. So, this particular person was telling me that it feels very good here. We all used to do service and now we are retired. So, when we come here, we get some company, we get our friends, to motivate ourselves, we arrange something or the other daily. For example, birthday celebrations. We bring snacks and tea, it's all voluntary. We all contribute. So, tomorrow is someone's birthday, so we will have the party at the lake. We might get samosas. There are about 30 women in our group as well. We also distribute sweets. We get the joy of giving, and it makes us happy. So again, a very, very dynamic and unique example of social connect with a lake. So all this while we had known that we need to conserve urban commons because it is a green space. It provides us with ecological services. But we did not know that it also provides us with so many social services. It provides so many people with a social space, with a space where they can relax, where they can do things that otherwise might not be possible. It might not, because many of their children are busy with their own works. It might not be possible to celebrate their birthdays in their home. So they do this with their friends here. And since this is a large group, it's also very it's very vibrant, as you can see. So they talk to each other and they participate, and sort of, if they want to discuss their own personal stress and anxieties, they can do that with their friends. And the main purpose, in a nutshell, is the fact is something that is there in the last line, that is, it makes them happy, something that otherwise might not be possible. So once they were all employed, right now they are all retired. So where else do they go? In a city like Bangalore, in such a crowded city, do they really have any other space where they can go and sit for a while, apart from these parks, apart from these lakes? Also, as I was talking about this, this is actually the picture of, I had gone to her home, and she was earlier employed as a guard in a particular lake, and this is her grandson. So it's very interesting, because because she says that it had been her duty to supervise the entire area, and it had been, so it's not a very boring job like the rest other kinds of jobs. She used to really enjoy this, because she used to see different children coming to this place, and this is a very, very strong reason that connects her to this place, not only as a workplace but also as something that she sort of has a personal connect with, a kind of a social space. And she was saying that at times I bring my grandchildren along with me. They enjoy the company of other kids around. I enjoy looking after the potted plants and the trees near the gates where I sit. I enjoy the fact that here people come and plant new varieties of plants. There are a few varieties of trees brought from Lal Bagh, nearby Botanical Garden. If you're from Bangalore, you would be knowing, by a particular person. So apart from the fact that this is her job, she also has so many interesting personal reasons that has fostered this particular connect, fostered this particular social connect with this, with the lake as a place for her. And then also there are multiple other very interesting reasons and very interesting interviews, as you can see here. So people have also met their business partners. So, for instance, a man from Bhopal who has recently quit his job to start a business with a friend, whom he met at a particular lake. So he was saying that I was discussing my idea of a restaurant with a group of other people. We met one day after exercising here, and this person was one of them. He came up to me and told that he was also thinking of a startup. From that day, we became very good friends and our idea flourished. Now we are almost on to start it. Then he also said that so many people come here with so many different ideas. I enjoy interacting with them. This helped me a lot in my business. I got my people to promote our restaurant. We got staff contacts, cuisine ideas, recipe ideas, decor ideas, and so much. We see parents who bring their children so that they can make friends with other children rather than playing indoor games. So it largely serves as an interactive place. We see people from different natives. It's very disparate, but there are very unique instances of social placemaking, human environment linkages. Now, I was talking about some examples which are purely social, which sort of attracts people to the lake because they have certain social causes, they have certain social connects, they have certain emotional attachments with that specific place. Now, there are other reasons bringing community here, and these reasons are plainly ecological. So the physical experiences of being here actually translates into very fascinating ways in which we can trace this process of ecological placemaking. So this lake attracts multiple IT professionals who remember their childhood spent amidst the greeneries, their home gardens, parks and ponds, and remember many of these people. So when we were talking to people who had actually contributed to the restoration, and as you can see that this entire lake restoration had been a voluntary exercise. So all these people had actually played an instrumental role despite their own busy lives, despite their own schedules, despite their work commitments. They had played an instrumental role to come forward and contribute in any way, in any small way possible, towards the restoration of this, not only this particular lake, but several other lakes across the city. So, for instance, there were two women from Andhra Pradesh who said that, and these two women were initially visitors before they started venturing into the restoration activities. So, they say that we had farms, we grew finger millets, paddy, mustards, vegetables, and even coconut. We had a well. So, I used to go swimming in the wells. Some people in my village used to take bath in my village lake. People also had cows. Now, all has dried up. This lake looks like my village where we get peace, we see birds, we see cows, and also we feel satisfied. We used to go there with my cousins. We had a canal, the Godavari Krishna Canal, near to our village. That was very near to their village, where they used to go with their cousins, with their uncle as well. I remember all that when I see this lake. So, a sense of the fact that nature is rapidly getting eroded away from not only the cities but also the villages. Also, a particular realization of the fact that we have to now act immediately because the memories are so live, the memories are so fresh. So, what can we do to sort of bring back not only those memories but bring back that initial state of nature that we were accustomed to when we were small? Another elderly man was saying that I enjoy gardening, but I hardly get space to make a garden in the apartment where I stay. So I often get plants for this lake. So he collects the seeds of gulmohar trees, he dries them, and he keeps them in the corner of the kitchen wardrobe for avoiding ants. There is another person from Tamil Nadu who says that this lake Solkere is like my home now. Another very interesting interview. A person, he was again a visitor and as well as a volunteer for the lake restoration. So he says that I come from an agricultural family, so I like greenery. My hometown is in Tamil Nadu, but it is dry for the last 20 years. Now it's so different than what it was in my childhood. People moved out of the place since there is less rainfall. We plant trees there as well. I live on a farm where I was small. We had a lot of trees. It was a happy place with less pollution and less stress. It was very green, lot of farms with paddy. We had a small pond then. We used to swim in that. In those days, we didn't realize the importance of those places, but now I miss them a lot since nature and greeneries are gradually waning away. I used to walk here when this lake was not fenced, and now also I come here. This is mainly because it's good for health. I also like to walk as I come from a village. Please mute your mic if you don't have anything to ask. I also like to walk as I come from a village. I like to see birds as well. I don't recognize these birds, but I like to hear the sounds that they make. It makes me happy. When I see the trees, I compare them with my childhood. So compelling reasons. Then there is another visitor. He says that I live here, so I want to make this place beautiful. So because we are staying here, we have some kind of accountability towards restoring these places. And he says that I have not taken money or any kind of CSR related assistance. I'm doing all of this by myself. To save lakes, you need passion. And then he took us around and he showed us all the kinds of trees and different plantations that he has single-handedly done for the lake. And there were also different other efforts that he was talking about. He mentioned that he had proposed and got a small partition constructed to stop the sewage water from the neighborhood flats to enter into the lake. He planted several native species of trees all by himself. And also he mentioned a bit of frustration that there had been very little handholding from the formal bodies. He was also mentioning about the fact that despite spending a large amount of money to construct pipelines, there was no water and all the plants were dying out of water deficit at a point of time. And in this particular, what he has done, this is also very interesting, is that in this particular work, so all these things that he's doing by himself, he decided to engage the children from the nearby slums who very regularly comes to water the plants with him. And these children also, they also spend a very good time over here. They enjoy this work that they are doing. So it's very meaningfully, this effort is put together very meaningfully towards the restoration of the lakes. So there is another person who says that I'm from Uttarakhand since that is a natural place. I'm used to that. I feel whatever money we are making ultimately has no value if our environment is bad. I want Bangalore to become like a garden city, one that it was earlier known as, with lots of trees. I feel environmental awareness is increasing and people now know the value of trees. It has become a social responsibility. The best part about this lake now is that the birds are coming back. And just take some time to look into this picture. Again, this picture I had taken, and again I would be telling you because you would not be knowing how it was before. So this body of water that you can see right now, it was a pool of sewage. It was a pool of effluents, dirty chemicals, effluents, and all kinds of pollution. So from that state, it has been restored to what you see here right now, with not only a lake and a fresh water body, but also with so much of greenery. So one particular native from the city of Hyderabad was saying that people randomly pluck flowers they should buy if they need it. This is a lake, a common, it's not a wild forest. Some old people spit in the open, that is bad. I have seen grazers come and leave their buffaloes and come and take them back in the evening. They don't maintain the space properly. My grandfather used to take his cows to the fields, not lakes. If those animals come to the lake and are not attended to by the grazers, the lake will become a breeding ground for mosquitoes. We also see multiple joggers, people who come here for they come for their own physical well-being, but they have largely uh, come forward towards the restoration of this lake. There was one 37-year-old female who is a native of Nagpur who mentioned that she was able to quit her stressful job after she came to visit this particular lake. And there were different reasons. I'm not going into the detail of that. But she established, eventually, what she did was that she established a park around a pond near her house in Nagpur. And it's a very idyllic version, but just one excerpt, just to share one excerpt of the interview. That she said that the morning freshness reminded me of my dream. I started looking for people who can help me in executing the restoration idea in my place. Today, we are a team of 7 members, almost near our goal of restoring the Joggers Park in Nagpur. So to sum it up, I will go into the detail, but just some particular ideas that we get from here is that lakes, first of all, we can see that they are bringing back childhood memories of spending time amidst nature. They are invoking fondness for specific trees, specific birds, other biodiversity from the protracted associations with them. They are affording spaces for people for reading, for studying, and they are also invoking environmentally responsible behavior. So I think I had told you earlier about this picture. This picture is actually something that is a very significant addition here. I don't remember if I had shared this with you, but this school, as you can see here, and the children playing, this school was initially it is still within the premises of the lake, but when the restoration plan by the state was devised, they wanted to fence off the school in order to ensure that the children do not come to the lake and do not make it dirty or do not sort of litter around and things like that. But then this community group, this voluntary group that all these examples that I gave you about, they very strongly resisted against the exclusion of the school premises because they felt that the school premises have to be inside the lake boundary because children who this is particularly an under the school for underprivileged children from marginal socioeconomic backgrounds. This is a government aided school, so this is the only space that they get because otherwise the places where they stay in the slums and the shanties, there is hardly sort of space to move. It's so cramped. So if we are denying this little bit of space from them, then that is actually not something justifiable that we are doing towards them. And we actually it is actually seen that this common ground that is adjacent to the lake, that is it is actually used for multiple purposes by the children. They play here, they bring their books here to study because it's very difficult to read and study in the places where they stay because it's very crowded, it's very it's crammed with people. So this is somehow this is a place where they get some kind of freshness, they get a positive vibe, they can concentrate on their studies. So this particular community group insisted on the fact that for all these reasons, we have to ensure that we do not fence off this particular school. The school has to be within the lake premises. And ultimately, it happened, and that particular earlier idea was actually it was not taken into consideration. So we sort of tried to think about the fact that environmental placemaking provides us a framing as we are talking about the socio-ecological systems, ecological systems being linked to the social. So it is providing us with a framing to understand the importance of urban spaces of nature. And along with that, it is also a way in which we can develop strong associations with natural places, in several multicultural global cities like Bangalore in this particular case, that is constituted by diverse communities, places which are constituted by high proportion of migrants. It is a very evolving process, it's a dynamic process which shapes the creation of a sense of place. And so, along with this particular research that I just wanted to discuss with you on environmental placemaking, I also felt that at some point it is so why are all these social connects necessary? Why are we discussing about social associations with natural spaces? Why are they important? So any natural scientist might ask this question, that a lake or a particular water body or a particular forest or a particular wetland has to be conserved because it can respond to the environmental challenges of a city. But my question is, in a city, my question first of all is the fact that if we have so well established linear relations, causal relations, that only if we devise restoration plans we would be able to successfully restore them, then why are the conservation and restoration plans continuously failing in most of these cities? Why are we not able to conserve the natural spaces meaningfully? And this is where our sort of intervention as social scientists, I think, lie, where we tried to argue that if we do not have personal associations with places of nature, if we do not have social associations with places of nature, if people in a city do not identify with natural spaces, if busy communities in multicultural global cities are only interested about consumerism, about shopping, about sort of different kinds of entertainment related elements, then we would not be able to establish this connect between people and nature, and we would never be able, if there is no personal association between people and their space, between people and their water bodies, between people and their city wetlands, between people and their forests, then it would be very difficult to implement the restoration plans that we devise. We can always come up with thousands of plans, but if the community is not personally invested within these efforts, then even if we are coming up with restoration plans, we will not be able to implement them successfully. Because we have to understand right now that the very nature of communities in many of these cities have changed. It's not the typical idyllic, homogeneous, rural based communities that we used to have earlier, who had spent their lives looking after the forests, managing the resources, and all. Right now, the situation has completely changed. People do not have time to think about nature. So we have to come up with a sense of place, first and foremost. What is a place? Is it only a particular area which gives us certain kinds of benefits, where we stay, where we take shelter, something that we use? Or place is something which is also social. So for many of these elderly communities, for instance, you saw that the lakes are important because it's a social space for them. It is a place which gives them solitude. It is a place which gives them friends. So if this area is lost, then they would not have anywhere to go. I did not include this a particular interview over here, but I remember talking to a mother of a differently abled child, and she was telling about this, that this lake is particularly important for me because this is the only place where I can bring my son, and this is the only place where my son can be on his own, because otherwise, uh, because of his behavior, he is continuously being judged and gazed in all other places in the city. So this is the only place where he gets a lot of positive energy. So how can I afford to let this place go? I have to make some effort, and I have to sort of uh, it goes without saying that I need this place desperately. So reasons can be diverse. It's not mandatory that there would always be ecological reasons. There would always definitely we need robust ecological restoration plans. But something that I wanted to sort of say this centrally is the fact that if the community itself is not motivated towards implementing these plans towards ecological restoration, then even if you're coming up with thousands of plans to restore, and we have actually seen this in different cities, that even if you're coming up with thousands of plans, restoration plans, it would not make any sense, because for whom you are doing it. And also another very important aspect that I very strongly I feel this has to be shared, that in many cases we have seen that restoration plans have been devised and restoration has been conducted by joint efforts, but then afterwards the spirit and the continuity has been lost. So after a particular point of time, people have given up, no one has time, and that particular resource, like this specific case of water body here, it had started to degrade. So again, another lesson that has to be brought in here is the fact that along with initiating particular plans, it is also very important that people have to be invested. And that is why I'm talking about social association so strongly over here, that people have to be invested in ensuring that they do not only remain in pen and paper, but they continue to be used, or people continue to invest at least some effort towards conserving the natural spaces that have been restored. Because if you just leave it at that, that now it is restored, now it is conserved, we do not have anything else to do, if you just leave it at that, then all this effort it gets wasted. And this is clearly not the purpose of the process of restoration that we are discussing. Okay, so this is one part of it, and then I also just wanted to talk about another aspect of my work, which is very different from what um, we are actually discussing all this while, and this is very interesting. I don't know whether I will be able to finish off with this part, but this is a very interesting cultural aspect that has been associated to many of these lakes earlier, when Bangalore was predominantly rural, and there had been a large body of songs which were dedicated to the lakes by the community themselves, and they used to sing them in multiple occasions. And this will actually enable you to to sort of have a sense of how nature is not only an ecological aspect, but it is so deeply ingrained within the cultural and the social system. So all these songs, they might not be depicting very very nice things always, but you can actually see that you would be able to see that there are very different imaginations, incidents, events that have been associated to the lake. So, just to say that how the lake revolved around the everyday lives of the local communities. So, right now, all these are getting eroded. So, that is why we thought of making a repository of all these lake songs that are available. And we particularly went to each and every village, and we requested these songs were primarily sung by women when they were working in the fields, and we requested them to sing the songs. We documented and recorded all the songs, and then we transcribed them. So before all these gets eroded from the history, from the culture, we wanted to make an account, a documentation of all these songs that had been historically a very, very integral part of the lake-based landscape in the city. So we will take a small break, and then I will also do a bit of a class exercise today, and then we will start with the a discussion on the songs. Okay. Okay, so I will be starting with the lake songs, but before that, I was just curious to know because we were talking about particular kinds of social attachments that plays a very that has played a very crucial role in this specific case. So I just would like you to think about some such uh, sort of examples of social connects that you think would can really work well for conserving nature in cities. You can give examples from any cities or from your own from the places where you stay, or whatever examples, relevant examples that comes to your mind, that apart from uh, the ecological or the plainly like scientifically devised methods that we come up with restoration, what other kinds of cultural expressions or social expressions or social practices or historical practices that you know about can play, according to you, a very important role in addressing many of these challenges uh, of conserving nature in today's cities. So if you can just give me maybe one or two examples, then I will get a sense of whether you have understood it in properly in direct way or not. So try to think about any experience that comes to your mind, or any example that you may think about that has a particular social or cultural bearing. Yes.
May I speak?
Yes, but who is this? I don't know your
I'm
name.
Pranav here. Pranav
Yes,
Nyati.
yes, Pranav, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So like I hail from Rajasthan. So like in almost all cities in Rajasthan, there are these like water like sort of artificial bodies called Bowries. Like they
Yes, I
have
know. Boundaries, yeah.
so like wherever I go, like mostly they are ill kept and they are not maintained well. Like mostly they are dirty and useless most of the time. But like in most of these places they are associated with some like heritage like they are
Yes.
maybe they are part of some like fort or an establishment like which was owned by the king of that time. So like if we
Yeah.
make people aware about these historical places and maintain them well, then like they could serve both purposes. Like firstly we'd be knowing about our heritage and have respect for it, and secondly like it would help in rainwater collection, and like it also like could be home for fishes. And also like if the government itself and along with NGOs and people, they take the initiative to like create this awareness, and then like say some particular boundary they cleaned it, and like and the awareness is made in say newspapers and like other social medias also. So like people would be happy and they would like feel that it's our responsibility to do the same in our area too. Like and like I remember there was like I read a news where a foreigner would come to like some city in Rajasthan, and he would organize like movements for cleaning those boundaries because like he felt that these should be maintained. So like if someone from a foreign city is doing so, I think we
Yes.
too can do that.
Yes. Pranav, I just wanted to ask you something because I'm a little inquisitive about this. One of our students is actually working, I don't remember what the exact place is, but in some place in Rajasthan. I think on the step wells or something he's working on. He in one of the talks, I think in his registration seminar only, he was talking about some NGO or some group of people who have now taken over the Bowries, and they're trying to make a restoration attempt. But I don't know what exactly it is in what state it is in right now. So are you aware of any bodies or any effort that is being taken, that is being like undertaken to restore them?
No, ma'am, like I'm not aware currently. Like in my city, I don't think there's such an NGO or something they're working on. Like, but like maybe possible in say like Jaipur or Jodhpur where there are like more number of step wells in general. Like, but
Yes,
I'm not
yes. Okay.
aware
Okay.
of such a thing in my city.
Okay. 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 Okay, thank you, Pranav.
Sure,
Uh,
ma'am. I'll try to find maybe like there's
yes, if you know, because I remember he was talking about something. It was quite some time back. Yeah. Anyone else? Would you please pitch in with your point?
Ma'am, can I tell?
Yes, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, ma'am, I'm Shubham Kapadia.
Okay, yeah, Shubham. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. So one other such cultural belief is that like when people connect some plants or trees to the uh, like some spiritual belief,
Mm,
they consider that plant as very sacred. So like the tulsi plant we see.
mm,
So in general, so many people, most of the people like keep tulsi plant at their home because
mm.
they feel like it is very sacred, and also it has some like medicinal benefits, but that is also there. But apart from it, they consider it very sacred, and it is auspicious. They think like that is auspicious to keep it, so that's
Yeah.
why they conserve it.
Yes, yes, yes. Good example. Anyone else? Any kind of social practice that you are familiar with in relation to nature conservation? There are so many examples in our country. Why don't you? I think you should be aware of any one or two examples, social or cultural factors that motivate nature conservation in cities.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes,
This is Vijay Kumar.
yes, yes.
In our area, the neem trees were treated to be sacred, and many people worship the neem trees.
Hmm, hmm, hmm,
Lot of neem trees in the village will be worshipped, and no one is allowed to cut them.
hmm, hmm.
In
Which
that
place you
way,
are from?
I'm from Andhra Pradesh, ma'am, Guntur,
Okay, okay, okay. Yes. Hmm,
and no one is allowed to cut the neem trees in the which were in the worship, so that they
hmm,
prevent them from cutting.
hmm, hmm. True, true. So this is a perfect example of, I think, what Shubham it was, right?
Yes,
You
ma'am.
was no after Shubham. Who was that about the neem trees?
Vijay, ma'am.
Vijay, yeah. So both these examples, this very strongly relates to the sacred groves that I had told about, and this is predominantly it's found in several parts of South India. I have seen in the north as well. So in Bangalore, for instance, you will find most of these sacred groves near to the lakes that we were discussing all this while. So the usual practice for the community is that uh, in adjoining the lake there would be a cemetery, and the sacred groves usually are adjoining the cemetery areas, and these are specifically managed by the local communities, and there are very strict norms about tree felling, because if anyone from the village cuts or chops those trees, then they are punished by the community. And it is a very in one way it is a cultural practice, but it also has a very interesting bearing with the ecological process in itself, because in doing this actually restricts the felling for firewood or anything other, because otherwise the community would be exhausting the forest altogether. And that is why these laws, these norms, I mean, these are very customary norms, and in many places, as they were saying, like neem trees, for instance, and several other trees, these are very, very strongly monitored by the communities, like the panchayat and then the village leaders, people like that, and they do not allow anyone to cut these trees, because they believe that multiple forest deities, gods, it's these forests are resided by them. We call these sacred groves. Okay, any other example?
Ma'am, my name is Swarup
Yes, Varun.
Ma'am, I think that Swachh Bharat mission wouldn't have been much effective if the government hadn't associated it with Mahatma Gandhi, because Mahatma Gandhi is highly respected in the Indian society, and uh, associating the movement with Mahatma Gandhi had created a very big impact on everyone's lives, everyone's mindset.
Yes, yes, yes. True. Very true. So, yeah. Uh, Others?
Hello, ma'am. Can I speak?
Sorry, your voice is breaking.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Hello.
Can you tell your name, please?
Yeah, ma'am. I'm Hardik Soni.
Okay, yes, yes.
Ma'am, like I come from Pune, Maharashtra. So uh, there's generally a practice followed there because there are a lot of hills in and around the areas of Baner, Pashan, and um, Hadapsar.
Hmm,
So, like some NGOs are involved in plantation drives over
hmm,
those hilltops and around the slopes.
hmm,
And like no one will like try cutting those trees because it becomes increasingly difficult to collect them and
hmm,
bring them down after cutting.
hmm,
So in a way it helps preserve the environment, and being
hmm.
at a greater height it helps provide oxygen to the nearby areas, so
Yes,
thereby
yes.
improving the air quality. So this program has been like followed by probably Nav Jeevan
Oh,
NGO.
okay,
My uncle was a part of it.
okay,
My paternal uncle was a part of it. So yeah, it
okay.
has been promoted by the government of Maharashtra as well for their increasing efforts.
Okay, okay. So also, I just remembered there is a particular tribal community called the Worldly community. I think you would be
Yes,
knowing
ma'am.
about them.
Yes, ma'am.
Hmm. So the
Yes,
what I had an opportunity to work with these Wali tribal communities. I was doing some work in the Sanjay Gandhi National Park in Bombay, and so they Sanjay Gandhi National Park is a very it's again one example of a very vibrant and it's a huge forest within the city itself. Just imagine that in a city of Bombay there is such a vibrant and expansive range of forests, and these forests are very renowned for leopards. These are leopard habitats. And I remember that our campus used to share common boundaries with the Sanjay Gandhi National Park, and like leopards used to come inside our campus, and every day there was a lot of hue and cry about this. That leopards have come, don't venture outside, and things like that. So right now, what has happened is that along with the Worli communities, there are several other people who are coming to the city, and so the Wadleys are the traditional inhabitants. They had been staying in these forests for a very long period of time, but right now there are several other people who have come here, and they have established their shanties and slums in the nearby areas. So what they do is that they try to restrict because this stretch of forest is already endangered, and a lot of felling has happened. So what this community does, this worldly community, they worship the Waghova. So Waghova is basically the leopard god. So this worship is very, very prevalent. If any of you have visited any of the worldly villages, probably you will see that they paint pictures. Worldly pictures are very, very common, and it's countrywide. They have a very well renowned reputation. The kinds of drawings that they do, and they also worship the leopards in the form of Wagova, and this is actually a warning to the community, particularly the newcomers who are now coming to the city and settling in the neighborhood areas, that if you venture into the forest and if you indiscriminately, if you fell like chop trees and cut trees, then leopards would be attacking you. So, and it's a very dense and very, very, I would say that it's quite this history of Wagova is very prominent, and it has been an extremely vibrant cultural practice, and there are several aspects and dimensions to it, but the basic point is that Wagova is worshipped to ensure that people worship and people have some kind of veneration for the forest. People do not just go and they do not just cut trees and exploit the resources. So this is a kind of warning, and which is inscribed within the cultural practice in the form of the worship of leopards. And still today, like in a city like Bombay, I was very amazed to see this worship of Vagoba. They do it in a very large scale. It's a very uh, they make a grand festival when the worship of Vagoba is actually practiced. Okay, any other points quickly?
Am I audible?
Yes.
In some places, like there are some properties like
Can you
land.
tell your name, please?
Neeraj, ma'am.
Okay, yes, Neeraj, yes.
Like, in some places, there are some lands or trees which are there for generations, and those families tend to protect them. Like
Hmm.
they feel that as their legacy, and
Yes.
they won't allow anyone to touch or tamper them.
Hmm. 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 Yes.
This maybe they some somewhat selfish, but this is indirectly promoting this conservation of nature.
Hmm. True.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Hmm.
This is what.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, as from all the examples, we learned that um, along with the kinds of experiments and along with the formal restoration plans that we are always coming up with, it is also very essential that the community shows some kind of connect, or the community has some kind of respect or some kind of veneration, some kind of cultural practice is there in relationship to the nature. And my purpose of discussing the lake songs is exactly this, because this is a very, very historical and culturally rich practice in in the entire South India. Here I'm talking about Karnataka specifically, but lake songs are, there are multiple other sociologists and scholars who have worked on similar lake related songs in Tamil Nadu and Andhra region as well. So these are very fitting examples of putting the cultural practice, the cultural belief in the context of environmental conservation. So as I was telling you, that this was for us also, that this was a very, very good learning experience. It was a very enjoyable experience when we went to several interior villages in and around Bangalore, in multiple places in Karnataka, and we got an opportunity to hear these songs from the women directly, and many of them were actually saying that these songs are right now, they are obliterating, they would no longer exist in the coming years, which is very true, because nowadays what is the relevance of these songs? But something that these songs would enable you to understand is the fact that nature has been historically a part of the everyday lives of the people, something that we miss right now. We no longer consider nature to be a part of our lives. So nature historically has been a very, very culturally specific part of the lives of the communities, not only because they needed water, or they had different household purposes associated to water, but also they associated these lakes to different kinds of events, to the kinds of exploitation that communities faced, to the kinds of coercion that they were subjected to the kinds of torture, to the kinds of human sacrifice. So you will not only find very happy stories within these songs, you will also find several gory incidences associated with the communities, the ways in which these communities were exploited by the chieftains, the Gaudas as they called in the historic times, the ways in which people were sacrificed for creating and ensuring that there is water in the lake. So these are very interesting stories that all of these songs contain. So they were sung in Kannada, and some of the songs were also sang. They were sang in Tamil. So we had to transcribe them into English because I don't understand Kannada. And then when I got the transcribed version. So I was at one point I was wondering that this is whether this is actually this would be good for research, or whether this would actually be a little difficult, because of the range of meanings that they communicated to me. Because when these women were singing these songs, I was not able to understand. I could get a sense of what they were saying naturally, but I was not able to understand because they were singing in Kannada and they were singing in Tamil. But then when I got the transcriptions, I was extremely, I was a little worried about how I can extract the entire this very rich cultural element within one piece of research. But then with time I actually realized that this is something that would be unique about archiving the songs, talking to people, communicating to people, letting people know that these songs exist. And a classroom would be the most effective, I think the most effective context where I can disseminate the meanings and the very rich cultural history that our country used to have in the form of these songs, in the form of nature worship. And I will be actually sort of showing you some of these songs. But this picture, does this picture tell you something? Like what comes to your mind when you see this picture? What is it about? Can you tell me? Yes. What does this picture tell you about? Nothing comes to your mind when you see this? Can you see the picture of all the women sitting together?
Ma'am.
Okay, so this is actually these are different villages where you can see that groups of women, they are sitting together. And one uniqueness about this is the fact that uh, you cannot there is just one, you can see one woman who is sitting in the top right hand corner, she's sitting alone. But apart from that, the others, everyone, they are in group. Okay, so one uniqueness about this song is the fact that these were usually, they were not they sung, they were always sung in group. They were not there was no one person who used to sing them. And that is why I heard like several women, they were telling me that they would not be able to sing the songs uh, alone. They would need the entire group with them, because that is something that brings out the meanings of the songs effectively. This is something that they actually believe. Now, one very specific and very important element about this these group of songs is the fact that it gives us certain culturally specific knowledge about environmental conservation. And these knowledge that the songs convey help us to understand how the local cultural systems interface with the ecology, interface with the nature, especially in the fast growing cities. Do these songs have any relevance for the cities that we reside right now, which are facing profound environmental challenges? What is the relevance of this history? So all these folk songs are a reminder to us about the social history of human inhabited ecological landscapes in India. These folk songs would be lessons for us to make us aware how integral nature had been in the everyday lives of the people. And these songs, most of them, they constitute very rich historical resources. And they, as I was telling you, that along with the beliefs, the sacrality, the rituals, the myths, you would also find that these songs would be talking about um, disadvantages as well. They would be talking about pain, they would be talking about violence, they would be talking about loss, they would be talking about fear, they would be talking about coercion. And these cultural narratives, not only happy stories but also sad ones, which were earlier embedded within the lake ecology, they still continue to manifest in the form of folk expressions right now in the city, and many of them have eroded away, they have been obliterated to a large extent. Because right now we have a very different vision of environmental conservation. But these lake associated songs form very important cultural identities that have been historically attached to nature. So we know that ecological knowledge systems, they have indigenous roots. Community life worlds have been culturally embedded within natural environments through religious expressions, folklores, customs, beliefs, which are largely implicit in material associations with nature. There are different imageries of lake-based ecological systems in the city itself that are expressed through mythologies, through oral narratives, through folk songs. They are expressed through collective memories, and they have been, for a large span of time, they have been passed on across generations. They do not necessarily always embody knowledge. They definitely do that to a certain extent. But something that they do very integrally is that they present to us very distinct forms of cultural identities that have been associated and attached to nature. And you will see that these songs are mostly prayers, because the lake is considered to be a goddess, the lake is considered to be the mother. So these are mostly in the form of prayers. And while expressing these prayers, you will find this whole range of socio-ecological connects, not only the happier ones, but also multiple expressions of social complexities that are inherent within these songs. So I will discuss in detail and give you some examples of some of these songs and the transcribed versions. And these would be very interesting to know that how they associate the lake to the everyday affairs of the village. And as I was saying, that not only the happier ones, but also there are particularly multiple incidents where the community expresses their grief in association to the incidents of exploitation that is happening. Maybe they have to sacrifice their daughter to ensure that water is there in the lake, because the village chieftain asks them to do so, that you have to sacrifice your your daughter, so that there is water in the lake. So several such incidences that come up, I will discuss that in the next class, that is next Monday. Okay, any questions? Thank you. You may leave.